Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. It seems stupid that anyone should think of their time they spend in prison as being some of the happiest days of their life. But once we were all together, that's exactly what they were to me. When the weather was nice, we'd go for long walks, or Pat and me would go down the gym and work out while Womes and Steele and the others would play badminton. We'd all watch TV together, eat our meals in each other's rooms, everything. We basically just made it easier for one another and made the time go faster. And we got away with pretty much anything we wanted. The main thing that most people miss when they're inside is drink, decent food and women. But we had a lot. I managed to get myself a top job in the kitchen, so at the end of each day, or sometimes at the beginning, I used to keep stuff to one side to take back to the cells later. We'd always have the best cuts from the butcher, the freshest rolls, the creamiest milk, the lot. As for sex, we made sure we didn't go without. There was an old officers' mess building at the back of the prison, about 3 fields away from the main complex. When we first got there, and had the freedom to walk anywhere, we'd take it in turns to go over there with our wives or girlfriends during lunch and have a quick bunk up while the others kept a lookout for guards. Nick used to go there twice a week for a picnic and shag with his partner Jackie, and come back pissed out of his head on champagne. We also developed a system for getting other food and drink into the place. There was no point in storing it anywhere for more than a day because we knew the screws would find it. Instead, we started getting stuff delivered. We also started a rota for visitors, so that we'd get a constant supply of spirits and other things we couldn't get out of the kitchen. Sometimes we kept them hidden in shampoo bottles, but most of the time they were drunk so quick that all we needed to do was chuck out the empties. One time we ordered a £60 Chinese takeaway and a crate of lager. We got the restaurant to put the whole lot in a taxi, and John Womes sneaked out of the prison perimeter and picked it up. Then we sat in the cell and had a blinding party. There was so much booze around, we spent most of the time completely off our faces. One of the favourite nighttime party games was shotgunning cans of beer in the cell. You take a small can of beer, you don't really want to do it with a large can, and you lay it on its side. You then take a key and make a really small hole at the end furthest away from the ring pull. Then you put your mouth over the hole and suck as hard as you can. But because there's nowhere for any of the air to escape, none of the beer comes out. Then while you're sucking, you pull the ring pull and in about 3 seconds the whole can of beer goes down your throat. It's a real hit. And then you do another one and you generally fall over, unless you get your timing wrong or you don't swallow properly, in which case you just end up covered in beer. The screws always knew what we were up to, but just left us alone, particularly because of Pat. No one wanted to get on the wrong side of him. The other thing we used to do to pass the time was talk about the stuff we'd got up to in the past. I'd talk about getting knocked out in a telephone box and sitting in a hotel lobby not knowing I was surrounded by armed police. Francis would talk about being pulled up for speeding with hundreds of pound coins in his boot, and then the others would take a turn. Jack had a brilliant story. He used to go around nicking bits of farm machinery, tractors, diggers and those sort of things. One day he was driving about and spotted this really tasty looking tractor in the middle of a field, so he made a plan to go back and nick it later on that day. He got rid of the engine, the chassis number, anything that could be used to identify it, and sold it on to some contact of his who then sold it on to a farmer in Wales. Now this tractor was really state of the art. It had all kind of gadgets and flashy bits on it that you don't normally get, so the farmer who bought it was always showing it off to his mates. His neighbour, another farmer, was so impressed that he decided that he wanted to buy one himself. He phoned up the company that makes them and asked if he could have one of the new X400 tractors. They didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "The X400, you know, it does this, it does that, it has this function and that function. The bloke on the farm next to me has one." They still didn't have a clue what he was on about, but they took his details and promised to call him back. Next thing he knew, the farm next door was full of police and both farmers had been arrested. It turned out that the tractor Jack had nicked was a prototype, the only one of its kind in the world. Police managed to follow the trail back and arrest most of those involved, but by a stroke of luck, Jack managed to get away with it. Mick also had some fantastic stories, especially the scams he used to get up to when he was younger in the 60s. The first thing he made real money from was red diesel, the stuff that farm machinery and factories that use diesel are run on. You don't pay any tax on red diesel. Nowadays it costs around 50 pence a gallon, while the white stuff costs 5 times as much. But they are exactly the same, they just add a dye to the white stuff to turn it red. When he was just 18, Mick, being the clever boy that he is, worked out a way of getting rid of the dye. He went out and bought a tanker and filled it with 10,000 gallons of red diesel. He then mixed a load of Fuller's Earth and let the whole thing settle for a few days. The Fuller's Earth took out the dye and Mick skimmed all the white stuff off the top. He then sold it to a couple of cab firms for a tidy profit. It was a slow process and difficult to judge how much Fuller's Earth you needed. So when Mick found this garage in the middle of nowhere where the bloke who ran it added the dye himself, he came up with a different approach. Mick went in with his tanker and asked for 10,000 gallons of red. The bloke filled it up and went to add the dye. Mick offered the guy a fistful of cash if the dye somehow didn't make it into the tanker. So the bloke just spilt a bit around the hinge to make it look like he'd done it, and then Mick drove off. He sold the whole lot immediately for 3 times the price and then went straight back to the garage. That was the beginning of a brilliant criminal relationship. Now the trouble is that with red diesel it only has a few specialist uses. It's not really the sort of thing you sell tens of thousands of gallons of in the height of summer. Yet this tiny garage in the middle of nowhere had sold more than 500,000 gallons of the stuff in less than 3 months. The firm that owned the garage launched a major investigation. The bloke got sacked while Mick got 18 months. Then there was Pat Tate. His whole 10-year sentence was purely down to the fact that he'd been off his face in the Happy Eater restaurant in Basildon one day. He had basically gone there after a weekend of non-stop clubbing with his girlfriend Sarah Saunders, got into an argument over the bill and hit the cashier and nicked £800 out of the till. He and Sarah both got arrested and Pat was found to have loads of cocaine, speed and puff on him. A couple of weeks later, he was at Billericay Magistrates Court on a routine remand hearing when he gave a signal to his brother Russell and a couple of mates who were in the public gallery. They all started attacking the police officers in the court, and Pat, after getting a few kicks in himself, vaulted over the dock and made a dash for the door. There was a motorbike waiting for him outside, and he jumped on and vanished. He buggered off to Spain and was doing fine for a few weeks when he made the mistake of visiting Gibraltar. He got rearrested at the border and brought back a few weeks later. Tate also used to do a lot of armed robberies on jewellery shops. He always had loads of girlfriends and used to give them all sorts of chains and rings to keep them sweet. He ended up in court over it once, and this ex of his got up and started giving evidence against him. He shouted over from the dock, "One more word and I'll kill you," and she decided she'd said enough. For some reason though, it never went any further. It was a bit weird with Pat. He seemed to have got away with a lot for no good reason. Some of the stories about what he had done in the past didn't quite add up, but no one seemed to be that bothered. We were too busy having a good time to take too much notice. In fact, I had such an easy time inside, there was no way it was ever going to put me off ever committing another crime. If I had gone then, it had been absolutely horrendous. I would never even consider reoffending. But because I went there, did the time, made some friends, had a big laugh, it didn't bother me. It made the whole thing a bit of a game. It meant that when I did something wrong, the last thing on my mind was going back to prison. The only thing I cared about was making sure that if I was going to risk getting put away again, to make sure it was for something a bit more profitable than counterfeiting money. You see films like Midnight Express where they hose the inmates down and people get beaten up by the guards, and I'm sure that for some people it's like that. But where I was, they were just literally desperate to get in. There used to be stories about how when it gets to Christmas time, all sorts of tramps and old people would throw bricks through windows and then stand around waiting to get arrested. And then when they do, they'd tell the magistrate to fuck off, just to make sure they got sent to prison. Well, it really happens. I met loads of them. They'd talk about how they got fed up, it was warm here, they could have a good time, and as far as I was concerned, they were right. We actually had some people, real villains, who didn't want to leave. I remember one bloke on our landing actually started crying when he got granted parole, begging the screws to let him stay. He was going, "I've made so many friends. I'll never have friends like this again." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was saying to him, "Mate, you're getting out. You've got your whole life in front of you. Just go and enjoy it." In the end, they let him stay for the weekend so he could watch the football team from his unit playing all the others. At first, I thought it was crazy, but pretty soon I sort of knew how he felt. As far as I was concerned, the friendships that we made in prison were going to last for life. You spend so much time talking, so much time together, sharing, helping, all that kind of thing. You can't help but get attached to people. We spent virtually the whole time laughing, joking and saying that this was the way every prison should be. And like the guy who didn't want to leave, there was a little part of me which hoped it would never end, even though I knew it would have to one day. A few months on, John Womes got caught smuggling in one too many Chinese meals into the prison and was shipped out to High Point. A few weeks later, Pat followed him, mainly because the screws were shit scared of him, because of his size and because he was getting more and more out of control. He was still nice to me and the others, but everyone and everything else in the world seemed to really piss him off. He started taking more and more steroids to make himself even bigger, and it was starting to affect his mind. A couple of months after he left, around May 1993, Mick received parole, and then finally Jack and Fran got to the end of their sentences and were allowed to go home. And that was the end of our little gang. I still had 7 months to go before my sentence ended, and suddenly I felt like my world had ended. I was all alone. When I'd first been sentenced, I was getting letters from family and friends on a regular basis, but the novelty soon began to wear off. The only letter I'd got in the last few months was from Mick, and that was only because he had lost a circuit diagram that I'd drawn up for him. I was finally released on the 17th of May 1994. I'd made a few calls the night before, but none of my so-called friends wanted to pick me up from prison. I think they were afraid that someone might see us together and they'd be tarred with the same brush as me. In the end, it was Jack Womes who drove over and took me back to Essex. Once I was back on the outside, I started off working for my younger brother Graham, laying patios and doing landscape work in gardens. We'd always been pretty close, but when I got out, we just argued all the time. It was unbearable. It turned out that he never wanted me to work for him in the first place, but my mum had put him under a bit of pressure. Got to look after your own and all that. I ended up quitting after a couple of weeks. I tried setting up in business on my own, but just couldn't find any customers. I didn't have any recent references, and it all got a little bit tricky when they asked what I'd been up to for the past couple of years. In July, another one of my brothers, Jonathan, asked me to work with him. Again, there were huge arguments within the family. His wife and his father-in-law weren't happy about him employing someone who had a criminal record, and as far as they were concerned, I couldn't be trusted. I finally got work with a friend of mine, Ricky. The days were long and the money wasn't much good, but I enjoyed the work and we became close friends. It's a shame. If the money had been better, then I think I'd have managed to stay on the straight and narrow. But as it was, I knew that I was still the same person that I always was. If the right opportunity came along, I'd be tempted all over again. You have been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.